For the Chinese people, this winter is particularly cold because of the restrictions on electricity. Chinese official media reported the electricity restriction was not a result of boycotting Australian coal because it only accounted for 1.9% of the national coal consumption. Is this true? There are overseas scholars who believe that China's nuclear submarine strategy against the US might have something to do with it. What is the true reason behind China's electricity shortage? From mid-December last year to January this year, China has experienced an electricity shortage which hasn't been seen for years. Electricity regulations such as reduction in electricity consumption by residents and businesses have been implemented in dozens of cities, including metropolitans like Beijing and Shanghai, and at least 4 other provinces. Companies are required to stagger peak production. In many cities, there are no more streetlights at night. Some places look completely dark. Elevators in some tall office buildings have stopped working, forcing employees to climb stairs, dozens of floors, to get to the office. In the city of Yiwu, known as the world's largest small commodities market, with a population of 1.2 million, factories have cut down work hours by 80%. For the power cuts and restrictions, the Chinese government have coined a new term: orderly usage of electricity. China has encountered an extremely strong cold current this winter. The daily high temperature in Beijing has dropped below -5 degrees Celsius and the daily low to minus double digits. In some northern cities, the central heating is adjusted to 3 degrees Celsius, which is more than 10 degrees lower than the usual setting. Despite having household air conditioners, people are unable to use it due to the notice of power cuts and restrictions. Chinese people say the only way to keep warm is to shiver. In mid-December last year, the Chinese Communist Party ordered a ban on Australian coal imports. Prior to this, a series of Australian products, including seafood, wine, and wood, had been banned in China. Chinese official media explained the reason for the power shortage was because China's major power plants incorrectly estimated the surge in electricity consumption for the winter of 2020. It was mentioned the recovery of China's manufacturing industry had driven the electricity consumption. According to China's official records, on November last year, the trade surplus reached a record 75 billion, and exports increased by 21% compared to the same period last year. In addition, it was explained that Australian coal imports accounted for merely 1.9% of China's national usage. The impact on China's coal supply and coal-fired power generation would be negligible. It went on to explain the other reason was the Chinese government would like to meet the goal of energy saving and carbon emission reduction. Over the past 20 years, China has never had such an electricity crisis despite its rapid economic development. Last time when it experienced a severe power shortage was in 2008 due to the snow disaster in southern China. In China, the price of electricity is regulated by the government. For example, the government sets the maximum limit for electricity prices. The government sells electricity to consumers. It also sets the difference between the price to customers and the price electricity companies are allowed to sell it at. In coastal areas of China, most of the electricity is supplied by thermal power plants, so coal prices have a great impact on electricity prices. Market prices for coal fluctuate. Under the premise of government pricing, if the coal price is higher than a certain level, the thermal power plant will incur losses. It is reported for the year of 2019, from January to August, the profit for thermal power plants is only 1.1%. The range of loss is 47.3% nationwide. The coal supply of thermal power plants includes domestic coal and imported coal. Domestic coal is of low quality and is a high price, while imported coal has high calorific value and relatively cheap price. Therefore, many power plants in coastal areas of China have switched to imported coal. China has become a net importer of coal since 2008, accounting for 30% of the world's seaborne coal. Australian coal is the most popular, which has the characteristics of low ash, low sulfur, and high heat, and the price is only half of that of domestic coal. Many coastal power plants in China have long retrofitted the equipment for the Australian coal. When the import of Australian coal is interrupted, such equipment being unable to process domestic coal has led to reduction in power generation. In addition, due to the high price of domestic coal, some plants have to reduce the utilization rate of the equipment to control the loss, thereby reducing the amount of power generated. In fact, since the summer of 2020, power plants in coastal areas of China have been fighting to lower domestic coal prices. For example, the coal inventory was regularly released to the public by power plants in coastal areas of China for many years. Last summer, when the peak of electricity consumption hit, the 6 major coal-fired power generation companies stopped publishing such data due to concerns that the domestic coal groups would raise prices based on such data. It was reported on December 30th, 2020, that in the cold wave of this winter, the domestic coal price of many coal groups in China has reached 700 yuan to 800 yuan per ton, far higher than the regular price of 500 to 570 yuan per ton. As such, many power plants in China are in a predicament where the importing of Australian coal is blocked and the storage of Australian coal exhausted. While waiting on imports from Indonesia and other countries, they are facing rising prices of domestic coal. You could imagine what the power plants would do. This is what has led to the current electricity crisis in China. Up to now, there are more than 80 Australian coal ships stranded in Chinese ports with more than 8 million tons of coal on board, valued at 1.1 billion Australian dollars. The customs clearance is managed by the Chinese government. According to the news on January 15th, the Chinese government made it clear that Australian coal ships are not allowed to unload in China. Why is the CCP so determined to punish Australia? According to the Chinese official media, Australian government has been making irresponsible political accusations against the Chinese Communist Party. The most noticeable is when the Morrison government requested to investigate the origin of the Wuhan virus last year, while the CCP insisted that the origin of the pandemic had nothing to do with China. Cheng Xiaonong, an economist in the U.S. who used to work at a high level in the Chinese government, believes that this is not the real reason for the deteriorating relationship between the two countries. He believes that the CCP is pressuring Australia to allow CCP's strategic nuclear submarines, which depart from the South China Sea, to pass through Australia's northern gate and to go into the Central Pacific Ocean unimpeded. The goal is to threaten the U.S. with intercontinental nuclear missiles. In recent years, the Chinese Navy has seized submerged reefs and built islands on the high seas of the South China Sea. This deep water area could be used as a deep-sea stronghold and launching site for the CCP's strategic nuclear submarines. Previously, China's nuclear submarines were mainly active in the Bohai Sea and the Yellow Sea. The water depth in that area was only tens of meters, and it was difficult for nuclear submarines to hide. Taking the deep waters of the South China Sea as a hiding place for nuclear subs, there are 3 underwater channels to reach the Central Pacific Ocean. The first is the Southeast Channel, which must pass through the Philippine Islands and enter the Philippine Sea. In August last year, the then U.S. Secretary of Defense visited the Palau Islands. It was viewed as an attempt by the U.S. to block the Chinese CCP's strategic nuclear submarines. The second way is the Northeast Passage at the northeast corner of the South China Sea. In the late fall and early winter of last year, the submarines, anti-submarine aircraft, and surface fleets of the US and China competed several times in the waters of southwest Taiwan for a month. The third way, the Chinese Navy is trying to bypass the Java Sea in Indonesia from the south to the Central Pacific. This requires the cooperation of Indonesia and Australia. When the U.S. Navy has not yet completed deployment and patrol in the central Indo-Pacific waters, the CCP has used underwater unmanned vehicles on a large scale to secretly detect hydrological data of nuclear submarines. The detection range is from the Java Sea in Indonesia and extends to the shores of Australia. In 2020, China will spend a huge amount of money in Papua New Guinea, which is located at the northern gate of Australia, to pave the way for the construction of a submarine base on Dalu Island. What's Australia's attitude? Australia announced a $270 billion 10-year defense boost in July 2020. This move is seen as a direct response to China's strengthening of militarization in northern Australia. The CCP has imposed long-term economic sanctions on Australia. When will Australian coal be allowed to enter the Chinese market hassle-free? It might be a lengthy process before the CCP approves it. The Chinese people may have no idea that their suffering from the cold is related to the great dream of the CCP, the dream to take over the world at the expense of their people.